And then go ahead and share your slides.
Yeah. You want me to just share my screen, or I guess I'll share this.
Share your screen is probably the best. Hopefully we won't run into any problems with split screens or anything like that.
Okay. Woo.
Yeah, don't worry about that. There we go. Now switch slides and make sure that we've got.
Oops.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That looks good. All right, I'm going to mute us on this end, and you can go ahead and start whenever you like.
Okay, so I should start now.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so so the point of this is really to talk about what we're doing with Perseus and why we need to do these things in order to enable it to participate in the type of high precision philology that you guys have been talking about. I think most people there probably know what Perseus does, right? What functions it serves. But just as a reminder, the Perseus for library system provides serves these use cases, right? It allows people to read, explore, and analyze texts, and that means they can find them by citation. They can read a primary source. They can find secondary sources. They can analyze the vocabulary and syntax. They can do some limited annotation, find other editions, analyze some things. There's lexical entity support. There's images and multimedia. There's analytical tools. There's dictionaries and grammars. All of that in a single interface, putting all the resources together at one time, which is really hugely important. But it's being somewhat old. It's geared towards the end user as an individual and not towards the end user as a digital philologist. So the data and tools, they're designed for manual use and use of the data as it exists in Perseus, but not for people to take and do further analysis on their own. So the long-term vision for the Perseus Digital Library really is to provide all the features it does today, plus the ability for users to annotate, add their own contextual information, and produce their own digital edition publications from the data sets. We want also to be able to easily incorporate data as it comes off the OCR pipeline. The Open Philology project, the Open Greek and Latin project, you guys are making volumes more text available, and it takes a long time to curate that text to the point where it could be loaded into the Perseus system as it exists today. And really, we want to be able to take advantage of it as soon as it becomes digitized and add on functionality as the text become more finely curated. And if I'm speaking too fast, please interrupt me and tell me to speak slower. We also want to be able to seamlessly incorporate data from other open access platforms, because no matter how much data we can produce, there's always going to be more data from other people out there. We can't do every single text. We can't do every single translation. We can't do all of the gazetteers. We want to be able to take advantage of all of this reams of open data that is out there. And in return, we need to be able to make our data available to those platforms whose data we consume. So to make it a real sharing ecosystem. And that means sharing not only within the Perseus ecosystem, but to other consumers as well. The Digital Public Library of America, Europeana, there are all these aggregators out there that ought to be able to take advantage and use the Perseus data, and they can't right now. And finally, we want to be able to archive all the data used by and in Perseus for the long-term in institutional repositories. We don't want to lose this data, and the institutional repositories are the ones that are looking at the long view of how to make sure it's there, 10, 20 years from now. So what does that look like in a picture? This, I think most people may have seen before too, this diagram that I produced, but really the idea is this sort of virtuous circle ecosystem where people can use the Perseus interface and tools to read, study, research, analyze texts. The data is coming right from the OCR pipeline into that, but also the OCR pipeline is contributing to and taking advantage of data in other open repositories, linguistic data, gazetteers, prosopographical data, other textual data, the catalog data, people's annotations, images. On the bottom of the picture is the Perseids environment, which this doesn't necessarily have to be Perseids, but it's any annotation environment where people are doing close curation, publication, annotation. So, and that too ought to feed back into Perseus and into these shared repositories and consume from them as well. And then on the right side, everything is going to the long-term preservation repositories. So this is really the like holy grail vision. But just to clarify why we can't accomplish this with Perseus 4 as it exists today, above all because it's a closed system. To make any of the features of Perseus, whether that's the relationships between texts and entities, the morphological data, the frequencies, the dictionary lookups, the tree banking data, to make all of that available for a new text, that text must be loaded into its own database and all other text reloaded as well, because there's a lot of pre-calculation that goes on in order to make that stuff, those features available. And certainly those things could be done in a more efficient way, but getting additional text in there, there's some other things to discuss here. The XML schema of the text in Perseus is idiosyncratic and inconsistent. And it's, as I said before, we're not able to incorporate texts at various stages of curation. But more importantly, all of those features are bound to the platform and have to be maintained by Perseus programmers. None of them can stand on their own because they're not wasn't designed as a modular system. And the big rub here is that there are no funded Perseus programmers. So Perseus 4 features not being modularized, they have no value outside of the entire platform, and they don't benefit anyone else to maintain or contribute to. So if we wanted somebody to improve the frequency calculations or to make more morphological data available, they'd have to be doing that sort of altruistically because they wouldn't benefit, their own projects wouldn't benefit from it. And we can't easily take advantage of external data sources and services. So the fact that all text needs to be loaded into our database is problematic, because even if we had a very clear schema for our texts and a very easy way for people to load them, people want to have their text on their own sites as well. And we can't assume that everything that we want to calculate can be loaded into our one database. It's just not, it's not practical. And in a world where things are increasingly distributed, we need to be able to take advantage of resources elsewhere. Another big drawback with Perseus is that we don't have a user model. There's no way for users who do contribute data or annotations or suggestions, whatever, to get credit for their contributions. And the technology behind the platform is now largely obsolete because it was last really worked on over 5 years ago, I think. So how do we, without targeted funding to rebuild, develop a new open and agile system that provides the same or really ideally more value to the very diverse end user community that Perseus has, and that also enables and encourages collaborative open source development of the code to make it sustainable? And you know, I remember really clearly when I started working at Perseus, when realizing the depth and the breadth of what Greg was trying to accomplish with Perseus, I felt really discouraged about how we would do this. And what he told me was that we need to tackle it in little bits and pieces. We need to move each thing forward a little by little, because we can't, if we look at the whole picture, it is overwhelming. And with the limited resources we have, we can't, we can just easily just shut down and say it's not doable. But we're taking this strategy to build pieces as parts of projects that are funded. We don't have funding to build the Holy Grail Perseus 5, but we do have funding to build Perseids and to do Open Greek and Latin, to do other things. So in building those pieces, we need to try to make those pieces both serve the needs of the specific project for which they are being built and which they're funded for, but also serve the larger Perseus 5 vision, and be useful and reusable by others, because it's possible we'll never get to that Perseus 5 vision, but it would be kind of a shame if we put all this effort in and everything we built in the process just got thrown away. So it would still be a win if we built pieces that other people were able to take and reuse and build upon and do interesting scholarship with. And we have to also, on the other side, practice what we preach, right? We can't say reuse my code if we're not willing to look at and reuse pieces of code and data from other projects. And in doing so, when we look at reusing code and data, we need to contribute back to improve them. But a big issue here is that as we build all these pieces, they're not going to fit together magically on their own. We need some infrastructure to make them all work. So just to recap where we are so far in this sort of grand project, we have built the morphology service, which was a RESTful API for morphological analysis. It has a Java OSGI implementation, which supports pluggable morphological engines. So with the Tufts morphology service, we can support Morpheus as an engine. We can support Whitaker's Words. We can support Buckwalter. Some minimal work has to be done when you plug in a new engine to map its output to the schema, the Alpheus schema that the morphology service uses to report morphological data. But it's a relatively minimal amount of work there. But the Java OSGI framework is a bit heavyweight. So we also just recently, thanks to the help of the Roshan project, have built a Python implementation of this service that supports the Hasm and Kazal parsers for Persian. And they mapped those parsers to the Alpheus schema, and they implemented the morphology service API. And now we have any tools that we have that talk to the morphology service that we originally built can also talk to this additional implementation. So an API is a really important piece of infrastructure because we can change the implementation beyond the API, but the API itself specifies how these tools are going to talk to each other, regardless of how they're implemented. Another piece we've built, the Perseus catalog. It provides stable URI, URN identifiers for primary source texts. It provides mods, mads, and CTS metadata about those texts. All of its data is available for reuse via Atom feeds, as well as in the Git repository the GitHub repository that it's sourced in. And it's also available via a Blacklight user interface. A key aspect behind the design of the Perseus catalog was to not tie it too closely to one catalog interface, though. So the process of getting data into the catalog and updating it is a bit more than it might be if we just said, okay, we're going to load all the data into the MySQL database of the Blacklight user interface and leave it there. We made a conscious effort to keep the data behind the catalog something that was of value in and of its on its own, because we knew that that Blacklight catalog may or may not be the eventual resting place for it, and likely wouldn't. So that's why we have that separation between the source data that's in the Git repository and the MySQL database that serves Blacklight. The Perseus canonical GitHub repositories are another piece. I don't know if you can say that we built those since GitHub provides the repository, but the effort of getting the data into them was not necessarily small, and it's ongoing. And what they do is they make the entire Perseus open source XML text available for people to contribute to do pull requests on, to take and do their own thing with them, and to see the progress as they go. The piece that I'm most focused on building, obviously, is Perseids. That's what I'm funded to build. And Perseids is a collaborative textual editing and annotation environment with support for diverse tools, editorial, and pedagogical workflows. But most importantly, I think, Perseids is an experiment in reuse. From the very beginning, what we had proposed to Mellon and to as the project is that we would reuse the base of Perseids is the Son of Suda online tool, which was built for papyri.info. We've used it, extended it, add features to it, but we wouldn't be able to have Perseids without that piece. And similarly, all of the tools that are added to Perseids for annotation are reuses, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. The other big piece that we've built, thanks to the IMLS grant we had, which is Arethusa. And Arethusa is a client-side annotation framework that's back-end independent and can take advantage of RESTful services to provide automatic analysis and linked resources. And this is, I think, one of the things that's hardest to understand about Arethusa is its back-end independence. It is not tied in any way to any database, including Perseids. It could be used with data that you house on your own local drive. It can be used with data in GitHub. It can be used with data that's housed in some other back-end database. The point of Arethusa was to provide a a nice to use interface for annotation that's highly configurable, that can use a variety of different tag sets, that can take advantage of services like the morphology service, but also ideally other services. We have the grammar that we make available to that for the Smythe annotation. Ideally, I would love for it to be able to take advantages of frequency services, to be able to contribute back the disambiguation that people do in our Arethusa should be able to be contributed back to lexical inventories, so that as people refine the results of the automatic parsing, that can be contributed back to the engine's data sets. We have a long way to go before we're there with that, but all of those things were motivating the design behind Arethusa. So what we have been able to finish so far is that we have an interface for annotation of morphology and syntax, but the design was intended to support many more types of annotation. Semantic annotation, named entity, metrical. It was a really ambitious project, and I'll talk more about later where I think we fell short on that. Another, I think maybe in some ways the most important piece that has been built so far is the work that Thibaut did to build the Captain's Tool Suite. This is a set of tools around supporting CTS and around, in a way, democratizing CTS so that it's available for other people to reuse more easily the value of CTS. So there's a whole set of tools here. There's the Sparrow toolkit, which is a JavaScript-based CTS abstraction and implementation of the CTS protocol, and we reuse this in Perseids for the Perseids client applications to provide a client-side CTS-based annotation workflow. So when you log into Perseids and you say you want to do a new tree bank annotation, and you can browse, or well, you can select from available CTS text and pull that passage in for tree banking, that is being supported by the Sparrow JavaScript CTS abstraction. We've reused that in other places too. The Digital NIE project that Marie Claire is working on, that annotation interface also uses the Sparrow abstraction. My Capitaine is a Python-based CTS abstraction and implementation, because some things, well, some things client-side is are sufficient. And having a server-side client to CTS APIs is really important as well. Nemo is a Python and Flask-based user interface for browsing and viewing text served by a CTS API, and we've built two CTS implementations of the repository itself. There's an XQuery-based one that's an extension of the original Alpheus Exist implementation that we did several years ago, that Thibaut took and moved forward into the CTS5. He built on work that one of the original Alpheus developers, Mike Gursky, did, and took that to finished it to make it available. And then now he's working on Nautilus, which is a pure Python-based CTS5 repository. And there's the guidelines and hook, the continuous integration environment for corpus management, which is, you know, this is what's enabling us to move forward really with the full CTSizing of the Perseus corpus, as well as the Open Greek and Latin corpus. And all of these things are completely reusable by others, which I think is, in some ways, their biggest service. So what have we, so those are the things we built. What have we reused? On the tools side, we reused Alpheus. We reused the Alpheus alignment editor and the treebank editor. We've reused the Alpheus reading tools and some prototypes, disseminations. And we also reused design. The design of the Alpheus treebank editor largely informed the design of our Arethusa. Son of Pseudo Online, as I mentioned before, is the base application behind Perseids. It provides workflow management around texts maintained in a Git repository. And this is a tool that they built not thinking of it being used by other projects, but because it was so well designed, it really is something that I've been able to do quite a bit with. Blacklight we used for the catalog. We have incorporated additional tokenization segmentation services from the Latin language toolkit. I would like to be able to incorporate others as well from the CLTK or elsewhere, but that's what we started with. We did do an integration with Recogito. It wasn't, that's the Pelagios annotation tool for named entities. We didn't take that as far as I would have liked, and it's sort of fallen by the wayside, but it was one of our earliest attempts at reuse and integration. We reused the Hypothesis annotation plugin, and that enabled us to add in additional use cases and support for annotation that weren't originally in our work plan. We reused the GapViz tool for displaying texts and places in texts to present the results of our annotation work on the journey of the hero. We built CTS support into GapViz for that, and that was we learned quite a bit from that process. Data sets. The main data set that we've reused at this point, I think, is the Pleiades data set. There are many more out there that I would like to be able to use. The Period O data set for providing a gazetteer for periods is really well designed, and one that I think we really need to take advantage of. But there's other data sets of texts, annotations. The Pelagios annotation data set is one that I would like to be able to take advantage of. The list is really endless, but this is what we started with. Pleiades, which is a really well designed data set with stable URIs and an API for accessing it. Standards and ontologies that we've reused, mods and mads, Dublin Core. Not going to be a comprehensive list, but these are the most important ones, I think. CTS, the site, metadata, Epidoc, obviously, LAUD ontology, that's the Linked Ancient World data ontology that's maintained by Hugh Kalis, the SNAP ontology for prosopography and social networking. Open annotation is a core part of everything we're doing on Perseids, and we've reused it in some sort of crazy ways in some cases, but it's proved to be very useful. OAuth, I recently added support for OAuth to Perseids so that clients of Perseids can more easily interact with user information. We added support for Shibboleth and SAML so that we could support institutional authentication on Perseids, and the Prov model for recording provenance, which is part of Open Annotation. Open Annotation reuses that as well. I would like to make more use of that and haven't thus far been able to. But despite having built all of that, right, there's still many, many more things that we need. We need persistent identifiers and a service API for non-canonical texts, like secondary sources and texts that don't adhere to the canonical citation protocol that the primary sources that we're currently working with do. And even some of those have additional needs that CTS doesn't support. We need a dictionary service API and implementation. We could reuse what we built for Alpheus here, but it needs more work and improvement. We need a frequency services API and implementation, a way to get frequency information about instances of words and tokens and parts of speech and everything really, but everything around the word. We need a way to access this information in a way that's not tightly bound to the platform that serves it. We need lexical inventory services, an API and implementation, so that when people are tree banking or translation aligning or whatever they're doing with the text, if they identify the stem of a word or the inflection, that can be contributed back to data sets that are available for other people to reuse and that inform the parsers themselves. We need a search API and implementation, and here we definitely will reuse something. We'll use Elasticsearch or Lucene or whatever. It's not that these things don't exist, but we haven't put them together with our data at this point in its new form. We need image support via an integration that supports IIIF. We need client-side reading support tools. Basically, we need modularized client code that can consume all of these different services to provide support while reading. This is what we tried to do with Alpheus, and which now needs to be redone in a way that's more reusable in bits and pieces and not just able to be put together in a single plugin in the browser the way Alpheus is. So a client library that talks to the morphology service and produces a dictionary service, for example, and produces the parse and the lemma and a short definition and access into the longer definitions in a single library that could be reused by Perseus but could also be used by other people. Similarly, client-side libraries that take advantage of frequency information or of other of these services that we're thinking about making available. Those are different pieces that we can mix and match together in different ways, because just building a single user interface is probably not going to meet all of the needs of the Perseus consumers at this point. And we need to add in additional external data sets, as I mentioned before. We really haven't done much with that yet, and really ought to be able to. But in the end, we need to aggregate all of the pieces into cohesive user-facing environments to make them understandable to the people that want to use them. Right now, we're thinking in pieces, but until we put those pieces together, it's going to be hard to understand what we're building and what value that we're providing is. Take a breath. So, what have we learned so far in this process, right? We've learned that open data is not the same thing as shareable, interoperable data. Simply saying my data is here, whether it's in a GitHub repository or it's available via an API or whatever, it doesn't mean that I can reuse your data or that you can reuse my data. Adhering to standards is a start, obviously, but much, much more work and infrastructure is needed to really support this, to support true semantic reasoning and machine actionable reuse of data. Right now, when I reuse data from Pleiades or other sources, I have to know exactly myself as an individual what to do with that data, and then code something to do with it. We need to be able to express our data in a way that we can take the human out of that that picture. Another really important thing is that tool reuse is not the same as no work. You can't this vision of a plug-and-play infrastructure where you just pick and choose the pieces is not really that realistic. You need to understand what you're using, and you often need to make small adjustments, because if it was written for another project, it won't necessarily cover 100% of your needs. It might cover 95% or 90%, but that doesn't mean, if it doesn't cover 100%, it doesn't mean you can't reuse it, but you just need to be able to do a little work. And on the other side, to encourage reuse, the value provided by the tool or services, it has to be both real. It has to be a real value you're providing, but it also has to be understandable. And you can't get around the fact that coding for reuse takes more time. If I'm just coding something for myself, I don't think about, am I going to document it, or whether it covers somebody else's use case, whether it's general enough, whether it's configurable. I just code what I want, and it works for my purpose, and that's really all that matters. But when you code for reuse, you need to think about all those things, and it takes more time. There's no question about it. And you have to also be willing to accept that you might do all this work for reuse, and it will be short-lived. We did quite a bit of work on the GapViz reuse, and we learned a lot from it, but we probably won't continue with GapViz as our display interface for Perseus, because it's too client-side. We need more features that it provides, and we need it not to be in the browser in the way the GapViz interface presented it. So we learned a lot from that, but we won't carry it forward. So you have to be willing to accept that not everything you do is going to last forever, but it doesn't mean that it still isn't worthwhile to do the reuse. One of the biggest things that I think that I'm really just now fully understanding is that researcher reward systems don't support this long-term view. Researchers need to publish their work. And to get your paper accepted, you need to build something that can stand on its own. And so saying you built a piece that helps Perseus, or built a piece that helps the maybe future Perseus 5, if it ever exists, is not enough. You need to build something that looks nice, that does something that answers a research question and stands on its own. So until there's reward systems for reuse, I think we're going to continue to struggle with this challenge, because time can either go into making things you can publish about or into collaborating, but resources usually don't permit both. One of the unique things about the Perseus grant is that part of what we have said we're going to do is collaborate, and that's what we've been funded to do, but that's not part of all projects, and it's something that I think we can't ignore. Okay, so what have we accomplished so far? Where I think we've succeeded, the social collaboration has been really, really successful. It was built for Papyri.info. Perseus is now dependent on it. The Digital Latin Library project is going to be dependent on it. There's another Papyri project. I think the literary Papyri project is going to be reusing it. And by us working on this together, we're all making this tool a little bit better. We're also making ourselves interdependent, which is difficult. And it's not a full win on all sides. For example, Hugh and Ryan, the original developers behind Social, probably sometimes really curse me, I think, because they would like to be working on something else and not on Social. But they also see how by making Social a component that is a number of different projects are depending on it, we're kind of ensuring its sustainability, because we can say to Mellon or whatever funder, you know, if I do this, it will not only benefit Perseids, but it'll benefit Papyri, it'll benefit this other project, and that's what they want to see, because they're tired of throwing their money away on projects, on things that serve one project and go into obsolescence. So I think that has been really successful. Another thing that we've been experimenting with Perseids is this service model, where we as a system provide services to other systems. And the thing that has seemed to be most useful here has been the review workflow. It's something that other projects haven't built but would like to be able to take advantage of. The Eagle project, Pietro, I think, was really visionary in this. He saw that they had a wiki that people were having trouble contributing to because they didn't feel that appropriate review was happening on the translations. And whether or not you agree with that statement that something has to be reviewed, the fact is that he was having trouble getting people to contribute without having a review system in place. And so we built an interaction between Perseids and Eagle that allows people to submit their translations through Perseids. It goes through a board and then back to Eagle, and that was successful, and we've now are implementing that for totally other projects. The Syriaca project was going to use Perseids for review workflow of its gazetteers. The Tiglio project enabled Attic inscriptions online to take advantage of this. iSicily has expressed interest in it. So I think this is really interesting. We're focusing on a single piece of functionality that Perseids provides and making it available sort of as a software as a service to other projects. There's a lot of unanswered questions here about how we're going to sustain that in the long run, and how other projects contribute a small amount to keep it sustained. But I think that we have at least proven that there is a need for this type of service model and that it can work. The open data APIs and export features of Perseids have enabled people to do things, that type of high precision philology that you guys are talking about there, that they can't do with Perseus, right? Giuseppe built this beautiful Dolphin inter-annotation agreement tool that uses the API, as imperfect as it is for Perseids, to access the data of the tree banks and to add on functionality that I couldn't build, and to do it in a way that is both separate but also connected to Perseids. And that, I think, is a truly impressive accomplishment, and it's exactly the type of thing that I was hoping we would enable by making this data available via API and via the open system that Perseids is. The export, even without APIs, export features have enabled things like Nevin's building up of his GH corpus using the translation alignments that he did with his team on Perseids. The Morphology Service API, I think, was also a success. It's used by Perseids and Arethusa, but it's also used by various individual researchers, both affiliated and unaffiliated with Perseus. Whenever it goes down, I find out that people are actually using it, because I get a bunch of emails from people saying, hey, it's down. Then I didn't even know that we're using it. So I think that has been successful. It's also enabled us to easily integrate the work of the Roshan project in Persian, so that Thomas, for example, his topic modeling tool can take advantage of the Persian morphology now, because he doesn't have to rewrite anything to talk to it. He just needs to send a new request for the Persian parses. And that's really what I had hoped to enable with that. The Arethusa configurability was a success, right? You can use it with a number of different tag sets, and it's being used in a really wide variety of situations, from Bob Gorman using this with his Latin 1 students all the way up through Latin, I don't know, 7 or whatever. He changes the tag sets as the students get more and more proficient, and that's a totally different use than the highly detailed annotation that Giuseppe and his students are doing with the Smythe tag set. And this, I think, was really successful. And CTS, I think we've validated its role in a distributed infrastructure for text. We've used it in a variety of different ways and seen that it is really a valuable piece of infrastructure. But there have been a number of areas where we've fallen short, have more work to do. Arethusa, it's not documented sufficiently for reuse, and I haven't made its value clear. This is something that Frederick and I are now working to rectify, but it was also, I think, probably more ambitious than than we could realize. So there's a lot of lessons learned from Arethusa. CTS, despite having validated its role here, we also know that not all texts are canonical, and it needs a modern API. And the lack of really clear dissemination models and user interfaces has made it really hard to communicate what we're trying to do, and they are essential. There's lots of areas where I could go into other things that we've fallen short and more work to do, but I'm trying to keep this relatively short, and nobody wants to focus on their failures anyway, right? So what pieces are we currently working on? On the Perseus side, we're working on continuing the Epidoc and CTS conversion and cleanup of text in the GitHub repositories. All of that's facilitated by the Capitans toolset and hook that Thibaut built. We're working on the catalog data, making additions to it, continuing the cleanup of that data. On Perseus, we are working on building out and improving the review services and data management APIs in Social. This is because, as I mentioned in the prior slide, these are the areas that we've been really successful and have seen that there is a demonstrated need, so we're going to continue to focus on those areas. We're going to work on developing an API for collections and an implementation, and this is going to be part of our work with the Research Data Alliance that I'll talk about in a minute. This evolves out of our attempt to use the site part of the site architecture for collections and identifying a few areas that it's really missing that we need in order to make that scalable. We would like to add support for semantic annotation in Arethusa, and we're experimenting with another reuse with the Berkeley Prosopography Services to better support social network annotation visualizations. And we're going to put some focus on preservation and dissemination solutions. And so, as I mentioned before, we're doubling down on this collaboration approach. The Research Data Alliance is a multidisciplinary global effort to build infrastructure for data sharing and interoperability. It's largely participated in by people in the sciences, but there is a growing number of humanities researchers involved, and the intent was for it to be multidisciplinary. What I think is there's a lot of things interesting about the Research Data Alliance, but the working group model is, I think, really critical because it provides peer review from the outset of the things that you're going to build and the opportunity to work with experts from other domains to produce outputs that are adoptable. And by making them adoptable not only by yourself but others, that hopefully makes them more sustainable. There's a huge emphasis when you submit a proposal for a new working group. You have to prove that what you're doing is something that other people want and that they think they could adopt. And this is really important because it makes you think much more critically about what you're doing. And so it's something I'm sort of betting on as being a way to that will make the things that are produced more useful and sustainable. So although it's more work for us to do something in this context, we on Perseus, Frederick and I are co-chairing a research data collections working group to define collection models and a create, read, update, delete API for working with them. The Open Philology Project and Clarin EU have a funded project to collaborate in this effort as well. And there's a number, our co-chairs are actually from the domain of climate science. There's a number of different domains that are interested in this. And what's really been fascinating to me so far is the level of similarity across domains of our use cases here. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what we produce. The other thing about RDA is that we're learning from our participation in other interest groups and examining the outputs of other working groups what we need to do to make our infrastructure more robust. So I did an analysis of how we might apply two of the RDA outputs, the data type registry and the persistent identifier types APIs to solve a problem we have around maintaining persistent identifiers for text and expressing our data in more machine actionable ways. I'm not going to go into this diagram in too much detail, but what it would give us if we were able to implement this, I think, is persistent identification of all text and related data objects that is stable throughout the creation, curation, publication, and post-publication life cycle. This is something that is not perfect right now in Perseids. Not everything that you do in Perseids has a persistent identifier from the beginning that lasts through the end of publication, and it's something I really think is critical for reuse. We want persistent identification that can be leveraged easily across projects, and which can allow for a wide variety of different persistent identifier schemes without requiring code changes for each one. So if I'm using site URNs and you're using handles and you're using arcs and this project is using that, we ought to be able to talk to these things without and incorporate data that uses different types of schemes without requiring code changes. And we want to do something that's supported by institutional infrastructure. When we create data on Perseids, I'd like to be able to preserve it in the library and have its identifier remain the same. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish. That's one thing that I think this type of infrastructure would allow us to accomplish. And doing that, what that would enable is this idea of publication, where publication is really a collection of data objects linked together and expressed together as a possibly ever-expanding graph, where each node in the graph might itself belong to one or more other graphs. I did a presentation on this at RDA in Paris, and if you want, if anybody's interested, I can send out a link to it because it describes this a little bit more clearly. But this really evolves out of work that I did with Monica a couple years ago, where we thought about the linked fragments, and recognized that what we need to do are produce publications where things are coming from other collections. We're building a new collection that is our publication, but each thing that's in that publication is a piece of another collection. This would also support concurrent annotation and curation of diverse data types from diverse sources in a common environment, and give us a way to formalize and express details about the data types we're working with without tightly coupling them to the identifier schemes that are used to describe them. And this is a bit redundant, but we want to be able to support different models of collections, like items, unlike items, things coming from our own environment, things coming from elsewhere. And by using infrastructure and APIs that are defined for a larger community, I'm hoping that we'll end up with tools that are more sustainable. The other area that we're looking at collaboration right now is the distributed text services effort, which is a collaborative effort with other members of the digital classics community to build upon CTS and provide a general solution for texts that have needs that are out of scope for CTS. So the secondary sources, papyri, other things that don't fall into that really clear canonical citation scheme that CTS is designed for, and we're working together to modernize the API. Okay, so that's it for my slides. I guess I could answer questions if you want, or I don't know if I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen here.
So yeah, questions? Can you hear us, Bridget?
I can hear you.
Where am I?
I realized that was a lot of information conveyed in a really short amount of time very quickly, so I hope I didn't lose you guys too much.
Maybe introduce yourselves with questions.
Is it working? Yes, you should be able to hear us.
Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Hi there, I'm Alex O'Connor from Dublin City University. Thanks for your talk, it was very interesting. I'm interested in the verification workflow stuff that you were doing, because we found a lot of the time that practitioners would be very keen to have this, very worried about it not being there, and then not terribly inclined to use it when it happened. And even more so, unhappy to be the subject of censorship or validation rather than the wielders of power. Have you had any experience with that?
Yes. So mostly on the first part of that, we have set up boards and asked the students or people participating to submit things to the boards, and then they sit there because nobody has the time to review them. So that is definitely a problem. I think that it is successful in cases where there are people that are dedicated to doing that review. So for the Eagle project, there are editors who are tasked with doing the review, and the review is happening. And in the case of many of our uses right now are pedagogical, where the review is happening as part of the students. Although the grades are not kept in Perseus, the review is essential to reviewing this to the students' grades, so that review happens. So I think that's definitely an issue, though, and as we move forward and use Perseus more in this way, I will be curious to see whether things continue to stagnate on the boards that are not specifically classroom-based. As far as the work being people not wanting their work to be criticized, this is a big concern. For example, with the Syriaca project that we're just embarking on, and it's unclear yet whether that will be a case or not, but it's something that we're thinking about, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
So a question from Giuseppe? And remember, the microphone's all the way over here.
Okay, just a simple question. What is the top priority for you right now? Or what do you think we need particularly?
I got you. I muted you. Don't move. Wait, did you hear the question, Bridget?
He asked what the top priority was.
Yeah.
Yes.
I actually don't have a top priority for me. The top priority are the things that I indicated for Perseus. For people who want to contribute to the ecosystem, I think the top priority should be the thing that's most pressing to answer your own research question, but to do it in a way that is ideally that contributes to the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. So if you, for example, if you need if you want to build up if you want to be able to take advantage of the disambiguations people are doing on as they tree bank, for example, or if you need more disambiguated data to do your analysis, building a service that, for example, Arathusa could talk to and send the results of people's annotation to for the purposes of using it in that way would be really would be a good thing. But that's just one example. If you need an interface, you should build an interface. I mean, it really depends on what you need the most as an individual researcher trying to accomplish a goal.
I would volunteer my own perceived top priority, the place we've made clear progress is the gradual conversion of our texts into a format that is consistently annotated so that it is consistent with the CTS protocol. And that's where the competence toolkits come in. There's a massive effort with CCEL, work going on with Petrolia Latina, as well as work going on with the we might call them the legacy Perseus text bases, at the same time. So I'd like to see the sort of repository of Perseus texts available as consistently as possible in a single format. And we're making good progress on that, but it's an ongoing struggle. We had, it's too bad we weren't able to schedule this so that you were able to hear so that Earhart and Torsten could hear what you were doing. We got an hour from them last night about Clarin, which was very useful. And they had things like a repository in place with versioning. So they had mechanisms to search their tree banks. I think it's clear that we could put a lot of our data into Clarin and do interesting things and it would get more data back out. They use TDI simple or a variation on that. My recollection is that's not too far from Epidoc. But we had a lot of discussion there. We saw this morning the work that Martin and Joachim have done with their CTS backend and front end, and then really moved to a point where they have an implementation that can ingest a lot of CTS data. And it's another mechanism whereby we can disseminate the work that we do in other systems. It's not clear what the relationship is between that work for now and Clarin. Is there any connection yet to get your stuff as part of the Clarin space?
It will become part of the Clarin space. So, also, the project that I'm working on now is so it's kind of the past. So this will be exactly.
So a question so we have Dirk from Dance and the Dutch. What does it stand for?
Data archiving and network services.
That's right. We just try to trick people to think it's Danish instead of Dutch. But Dirk from Dance in Netherlands, and we have Alexander O'Connor from Dublin, and both of them have been asking all sorts of questions like, why do you have semantically significant identifiers and so on? So we've been getting a lot of interesting questions from them. But a question for you both would be, is there a relationship between the requirements that Bridget just went over, and there's a lot of them, so it may take some thinking, and the things that you could imagine doing in your respective environments?
So first of all, on the distributed document stuff, I'm thinking back at Ted. It always brings back Ted Nelson and the transclusion, right? What you've described is there's a couple of efforts going on that we're worth looking at. One is there's work on linked data fragments and nanopublications that will be well worth examining.
Yeah.
Transclusions are a bit like fusion. They've been around, the idea's been around for a long time. They've been about 5 years away for the last 30. Mostly because where they fall down is the bidirectional linking creates these integrity requirements that are very, very difficult to enforce. Well, in terms of the relationships, I think that one thing that would be useful, very useful for us is there's a low awareness, I think, of the amount of use cases out there for minor languages and for this sort of content. Because, I know when I talk to my colleagues, especially in machine translation about this, they say, yeah, but nobody uses it, or nobody wants this. And then I come here and I come to places like this, and the venue is extremely strong, and there's a compelling case. So some way for me to communicate the existence of this community to get them to kind of stop messing around with German and come over here would be useful,
I'm intrigued by the relationship between objects. We've heard a lot of versions, but also about collections. There are two quite different relations between objects, and they require different treatment. And I'm looking forward to a situation where we can handle both as a matter of routine. But if you combine collections on the one hand and versioning on the other hand, where collections might be loose, then you get quite intricate time patterns of change of such objects. Mm-hmm. But if you do it right, I think archives can be powerful resources, powerful sustainers of this kind of living resources. And I like to point to the work of Herbert van Sompel of Los Alamos Laboratory in Memento, which is, I think, an excellent versioning system, and maybe more of that. And it is orthogonal to the collection relation. Well, maybe this is a bit theoretical, but we at Dance, we just support data sets. Well, this is only a shadow of the kind of object that has been described here, that we hear a lot. So there's a big gap between what we actually offer and what we ideal. So I consider that as homework for us.
Bridget, do you want to respond or comment on that, on either of those?
Well, on the last, I would say I hope that maybe you will consider participating in our research data collections working group through the RDA, because I think that this is critical, being able to deal with collections and to deal with versioned objects in collections and versioning collections themselves. These are all the things we're talking about. And if we could develop a solution that works not only for our use case but many, many others, I think we will have done something really useful. But we need people to participate to make sure we can do that.
Does he have to go to Japan?
I'm sorry?
I was wondering, saying, does he have to fly to Tokyo? Where's
No. the RDA has plenaries every 6 months where people get together and do work together, but the work has to happen in between the plenaries in order to actually accomplish anything. So you don't have to be at the plenaries to participate. You just have to sign up and attend meetings, remote meetings, and contribute via the email discussions. The research data collections working group is just getting started now. This is the Tokyo meeting is going to be the very first meeting of the group. We've had an exploratory meeting in Paris, but it's just getting off the ground now. So it's a good time to get involved.
So we also had Tom Geldof from Trismegistus here, and we were having conversations about, among other things, trying to help him get as much of the Perseus catalog data as possible and how we can do that most easily. But they've got a lot of, that's another source of data aside from Pleiades that we would be interested, that we obviously would like to use. I don't know, Tom, if you have any thoughts on that sort of thing, or just Megistus, or anything you've seen, or.
Well, I think if you already aligned to gazetteers like Pleiades, for us it would also be easy to give us our Trismegistus gazetteering data about place names, for example. And just by the alignment with Pleiades, we can already have an easy match with our TM data. So we are always willing to exchange data. So that's why I was also interested in hearing about this RDA. I hadn't heard of it before. So flying to Japan is maybe a bit expensive, so maybe we'll try to sign up first and then see where these meetings happen.
Where's RDA going to be in the fall, Bridget?
It's going to be in the U.S. in Denver. But on the Trismegistus side, I should have mentioned that it's actually the TM IDs of the inscriptions that enabled the integration with Eagle, because we use the TM IDs of the inscriptions as the stable identifier that we pass back and forth between the two systems. So Trismegistus, in providing those IDs, provides an essential piece of the infrastructure that we're talking about.
Nice.
Now, one thread that I think I mentioned on an email that I'd like to pick up is that, and you actually said you've done some work with Recogito, which is geospatial named entity tagging, but that hasn't really been pursued. And a question for me is, what would it take? Would it be possible? And we have Günter Gertz here. Would it be possible for us? What would it take for us to benefit from the WSGI environment for tagging named entities and relations in full text, especially if you're handing out chunks, CTS-defined chunks of data? So I don't know how clear that question is or how clear the answer is, but I throw it out there. And I don't know if anyone, and I see at least one person, Chiara is all over this, so we have enthusiasm.
That's actually the focus of my concerns now. Exactly what you said. I have nothing to add to it.
The good sir? What do you?
Yeah. I mean, up to now, the only texts we can handle are in HTML, right? And we have some partial parsers for the definition. And other terms, if you have some complicated floors, you can also part by technical terms, all kinds of time specification, only in language. The point of annotation is that all these parts of items are indexed semantically in terms of an underlying ontology. The system is configurable, but we use an default ontology of CRM and augmented by some domain specific. And then semantic indexing is a long path of classes and relations, and it's broken up into kernels. So because the whole WSGI system is nothing else than a set of plugins for toolbar. All texts are also present as nodes. So this would be kind of a different interface, but we have not yet any interface to CDS. So it would be a separate matter that you can export it from it. Up to now, as I said, HTML, including audio play, but working on the interaction of I we hope to be ready with that, but at last by the end of this. Thank you already.
And I ask one follow-up question, which is,
that's all land. I mean, Apache, PHP, no, because this depends on Drupal.
so when someone highlights a name and says this is a place name,
Yes.
how is that represented? Is it an inline annotation, a tag around that word?
Tag, yeah.
Okay.
Tag.
So basically, if there was a CTS server that handed over a chunk of text, and then people annotated it, then they can in theory, get the text back with the tags in them, which hopefully would be valid in TEI.
When the TI editor is ready, there's somebody actually working on it. What we have is a augmented version of the tiny MCE, and the editor is connected. So that's all I can say. I don't know how long it will take. Hopefully, we will have it ready this summer, but the end of our grant is by the end of this year.
I couldn't hear much of what what Gunther was saying, but I would say that the WSGI, I think, is a really interesting tool, and it's something I would have liked to have time to explore a bit more. For the Recogito integration, we did that via a hackathon where we set aside time with the developers of Perseids and Recogito to come together and just get it working. And I think sometimes that's what's needed. You need to set aside a dedicated space of time just to look at it and see if it's feasible or not. We did use Recogito in that way, where we had people export CTS chunks of text from Perseids into Recogito. They did the annotation in Recogito, and then we ingested it back into Perseids and converted it back. So that would be one model that we could consider. Whether or not it's, I also am interested in capturing standoff annotations so that the annotations don't all have to be done inline. But Greg, in order to make it happen, I do think you need to set aside dedicated time and resources to analyze the feasibility, because it does take time to do reuse.
Absolutely. So I think an outcome of the conversation so far have been to confirm what we thought would probably happen. So we will write up a proposal a short-term proposal to the Bay and Bay after travel and meetings. That will be submitted and will be represented as a supplement to the Leipzig, next stage of Leipzig Clarin D. And then, but we will not be, and we're not going to define our relationship to Clarin or to Daria immediately. That'll be part of the conversation that we have over the next year. Ideally, a year from now, we will submit a budget or proposal to the BAM-BAF that balances the need for sort of global scholarship and German money for German interests. But that would, has the possibility to support substantial building over a substantial period of time, with an emphasis, I think, on taking things, exactly this kind of problem. You have a system like Whiskey with a community that already uses it, people who badly need the capability that it has. And so, you know, there's a known entity to build on, like Perseids. How do we put that together? How do we take, if I were to take a priority, one priority would be putting together the digital Latin library, SOSL, Perseids, and associated projects, and making them able to talk to Daria and or Clarin, so that you would be able, data would go into different places. But I think right now we need to decide what are the topics, how do we frame this conversation? How many meetings do we have? Where do we have them? How do we break this down into a manageable set of tasks that is sufficiently inclusive to get very different voices, but does not make us all go crazy, or does not spin into the kind of hyper complexity that I tend to lend to things. So, I mean, that's kind of where the conversation is now, I think. So, what should we? So, I'd like to open the floor, because I promised people I will not. They can all go out and play at 4, no later, or our time, so less than an hour. So what should we do, gang?
It might be interesting to think about some more hands-on-ish sort of activities, you know, on the range of the star-a-thons, you know, be it hack data or archive-a-thons, because those could be an interesting place to sort of take some similar sets of data and try them out, or try to parallelize them, or attempt some tools on them. And the advantage of doing a little bit of that is that what it gives you is a step forward in the detail of the technical questions that you ask. So that, you know, typically a nice way to do that is that you try and pair up a data owner with a technique, you know, a problem solver, as it were. You know? Those could be a nice approach.
So Bridget, would we have the editathon that'll happen at Leipzig, and I know that's a crazy week, but is that a space that could advance that conversation, do something like that, or is that already so crazy that you don't want to put any more complexity into it?
You're muted, Bridget. You're muted.
Sorry, which week in Leipzig?
The editathon.
April 18, 22.
The editathon?
18, 20 we have Teach the Future.
Oh,
Then 2022 we have the editathon.
I was not. I'm not planning on coming to Leipzig for that, Greg. But it doesn't mean that you can't proceed. So.
Okay, well, we'll look at the agenda and see what Tim and Marie-Claire have on tap. But that might be the kind of thing that's sufficiently practical and hands-on that it would give people that step to go beyond general, you know, beyond PowerPoints to actually do something, because I think it's what people are talking about. So we're going to be having a meeting in that, whatever week that is, second half of April here in Leipzig. And I don't know how crowded or crazy it is. We're hosting it, but I'm not running it. We have a conversation with Tim Buckingham and Marie-Claire and see whether there's an opportunity there, or we should try to do something else.
I do think you need to focus. You know, if you try to put too many things into 1 week, it's hard to do any of them effectively. So, if I do think it's better if you have and I couldn't hear the whole discussion, so I'm not positive what you're talking about. But if you have, I think it's better to come together around a very specific thing that you're trying to accomplish. When it comes to putting systems together, that is sometimes what's needed. So.
What would be the partners, Bridget, that you would name off the top of your head? And I know I'm just asking you off the top of your head. It's not an authoritative list, but just who are the people that come to mind that we should talk to about? Well, let's say, you know, an open Perseus, which is kind of a Perseus 5 that is like so open and transparent. It's not really restrictive Perseus. But who are some of the people we ought to be thinking about? We got Syriac, we've got Eagle, we've got Tiglia, sort of overlapping. ELF.
I mean, there's the Roshan team who have been really understanding this vision, who I definitely would include them. You know, there's probably lots in Europe. I mean, we ought to, I don't really know what's happening with that DSIT project or whatever, but it looks like to me, as I read some of the things they post, that they have a very similar interest. So, you know, participating in the DTS group, we have the Distributed Tech Services group, we have Hugh Kalis, we have Jonathan Roby, we have Paulo Manello. Emmanuel Morlock had been interested in that. There are a number of people. So there are a lot of people we could collaborate with on that. But I think you have to have people who have a demonstrated need and want to work in this collaborative space.
Yeah, no, I think we have a lot of those, but I think we, you know, this is just part of it. What do other people think?
What about the guy in Britain? That's an interesting group to get involved. They have a few job postings. That's why I know them, and I think the kind of thing they do, they link up Lexica with Cobra, and they're interested, I think, not only in text but also in facsimile. But I've not heard about them here, but they're in Göttingen, so why not involve them?
Do you know them?
No, I don't. What's the?
It's a German-Israeli project. Scripta Cumanica Electronica, funded by the German Research Foundation. So they do something with the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's just a group.
Yeah, I don't know anything about them.
Okay, of course.
So one technology that I think has been referenced, we haven't talked a lot about, because we've been talking a little further downstream, has been the IEEE stuff, so the mechanisms, standards by which to, you know, to annotate parts of a text-bearing object. And you know, our friends at Johns Hopkins worked on that. Apparently, there's a collaboration between Harvard and Leipzig and other German libraries. So it's one of the few places where we actually do have German-U.S. library collaboration. I don't know if anyone here knows anything about that. So everyone's shaking their heads. It's not their area of expertise.
The IIIF, is it?
I think it's like
Triple I.
Triple IF. We used to be called Shared Canvas, and now it's the Triple IF. It's Image Interoperability something framework. Basically, it allows you to specify. I don't know how many people are familiar with what the site URN syntax for images does, but it allows you to specify there's two aspects to it. One is about placing images on manuscripts and annotating them, and the other is just an API for working with images that allow you to specify the format of the image, the region of interest on the image that you want to retrieve, that sort of thing, in a standard interoperable way. It's really I think a critical piece of infrastructure because it allows you to talk about images and annotate images and link them to text. And there's a lot of tooling being built up around it.
So are there any thoughts on particular concrete problems? The kind of thing, the cluster focus activity that we might address next. I mean, so, Kiara's there, like, she wants to be able to annotate geospatial entities and attach those annotations to a useful ontology. But she's nodding her head. There's one thing thrown in there.
You can throw me into that box as well.
The same. So Maxime is seconding. Yeah, Dirk.
Combining textual criticism with linguistic analysis.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Bridget, do you want to talk a little bit about what your conversations with the DLL and Alpheus and how we're just moving, enabling that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, I touched on that a little bit in the presentation. What we talked with them about doing was collaborating on a set of JavaScript libraries around providing reading support. So what the Alpheus tools did were to provide, in a browser plugin, access to resources like morphological lookup and lexical services, dictionaries, inflection tables, that sort of thing, and put them all together so that you can mouse over a word of text and get the dictionary definition, link into a full definition in one or more dictionaries, and get additional reading support, such as links to grammars to that specific part of speech or whatever it is that the grammatical characteristics of the word were, analysis of inflections. Put all those resources together in the browser and make it accessible for any text. We did that in a really modular way, except we did it for Firefox 5 years ago, and now it needs to change. And so what we talked about with the DLL team was sort of breaking that functionality apart into JavaScript library packages that are distributed via NPM or Bower or something like that people can mix and match to provide the type of reading support that they want for their environment, but also make it available for Alpheus to recombine in a new plugin format that works with the newer browser plugin technology, works in Chrome and other browsers. So build pieces that could serve a site like the DLL, site like Perseus, but also could serve the Alpheus plugins. That's what we talked about doing with them.
Maybe something more aggressive can be done. We have both types of things available, but really integrate them also in your interface. And even in musicology, there's a project, it's called Abiron, also a German project.
It was working for me, so it should be.
No,
go ahead, because we've got sound. We're just
something very interesting is happening there. They made a system for old musical scores, and before the system, researchers always looked at the transcribed music, but now they made the facsimile so accessible next to the transcriptions that most musicologists are looking at the facsimiles and no longer at the transcriptions anymore. So we could do that with Greek as well, the Greek manuscript of the New Testament. So imagine that you don't look at the printed text, but at the facsimile text, and that you can operate with it as if it were a transcribed text. So you tap a word, and you see all the occurrences of that word in other versions. Or you just switch versions while you look.
TCS?
No. this is possible if you put the existing resources
Yeah.
together.
No, sure.
That's, so Münster has a lot of geography of where the words are. And other people have transcriptions and do collation.
No, but I think that actually would be incredibly relevant for outward sources with funny languages and scripts, where the precision of OCR description is always a problem. Having a sort of an image label where the interpreted text,
Yes.
it would actually be a very interesting solution.
Yes. But institutions that have the images should open up themselves and for APIs that can, so that the images
All lots of text on archive.org. So, which is
not manuscripts.
manuscripts probably not. Yeah. Although I think it's like hit and miss, but there are lots and lots of. For example, the University of Toronto Library is constantly uploading their books there, and it's like all the metadata on the upload is clearly stating that it's University of Toronto. Of course, Hacky Trust has lots of this accessible when they are copyright. So.
But if I understand correctly, what you are saying is kind of not exactly replace textual criticism, but make something parallel to it. So have a manuscript image, and then go into that image and be able to see what other manuscripts of the same text
yes.
have in that place.
And use the possibilities of interfaces nowadays, use it in a much better way, and just forget about the traditional critical apparatus.
Exactly. Yes. So this goes a step further into the presenting parallel 2 or 3 transcribed versions of the text.
Yes.
But putting the very image of the text and giving the parallel readings that you may have.
Indeed, and not put them side by side or interlinear, not that, on top of each other, where you can just slide and then see one version or the other, or where you can tap a wheel and you see all the 600 versions of the Book of Jude, for example. You can even make a query engine of that. So suppose I have a reading of this passage here and a reading of that passage there. Is there a manuscript that has both readings or not? So you can just query from your interface.
Or how many manuscripts have this reading and how many manuscripts are from which time have that reading.
Yes.
I mean, I think there's, in the literature, people wrote about, in Shakespeare studies, how the publication of the high-resolution first folio facsimile edition as a print book changed the way they edited it. And I worked on Shakespeare editions for a while, and they would try, through what we do is we try to describe this object that's not there. It never works very well. It's like, oh, there's sort of an underline over here, like a little line over there. And now they just say, well, look at it. And for many of the Greek and Latin authors we work with, one or more of the main textual witnesses are already available under a CC license or in an IFFF supportive environment. This is the case for Pollux, where the Palatinus is available. It's the case for Thucydides, where several of the most important editions are available. So we are in the position to start modeling. I mean, one of my ambitions is to edit like 4 pages of Thucydides and really do it right, where we link to those manuscripts that are available. In some measure, that's what's being done by the Homer multi-text, where they're not using a IIIF thing. They have their own way of addressing it, and they have their own images, but they're demonstrating what they call total editing, where you are always pointing to the image of interest, which is the basis for your statements. And you never have these dead links of the act credit.
But I think it would be really interesting to gather this experience from Homer multi-text and see questions like that, how we can create new environments where we see critically our texts. So I avoid the term critical edition. and try really to put them down in a text or in a kind of description of what would be desirable from such environments for viewing in a critical way text historical documents. Because we don't have that. We can point to the Homer multitext as an example, but it's very difficult to have the very principles of it also transferred to other texts with different traditions, because we have to admit Homer has a very, very, very unique kind of tradition. And in order to be able to propagate it and say, look, it is possible to create a critical environment, or environment where you can read critically a historical text, you can follow this set of principles and try to create such an environment. I mean, this is something that I would miss, actually. I find it very interesting. It goes as beyond the discussion, how should a critical edition look like in our digital age, and it really puts it in more practical ways.
And the kind of format that Alex suggested could be used to make the mental jump to see a tiny concrete example and what you can do with it, because we need that mental jump.
It's a huge jump.
Would it help if you have the possibility to view a high resolution image compliant to the IIF? So we have the IIF viewer, which is compatible at least, and then you can mark up some area, and then you can open a text window, which works just the way I presented, where you can write your comment, and you can, of course, index it in terms of opening entities, technical terms, stuff like that.
Bridget, what are you doing for in Perseus?
It's already working.
Yeah.
Hmm? I can't hear the conversation that's happening there, so I'm not sure what the question is.
So the question is, so Gunter suggested, or talking about demonstrating the fact that you can actually have an edition that links to an image, to the region of interest of the image that's the source of that edition. And Stelios was talking about the Homer multitext, and Gunter was talking about it also. And my question was to you, how far you've implemented that in Perseus? I know you've done some work with that.
Yeah, we started building up some tools around serving site managing and serving site collections of images, and we have a JavaScript-based tool for annotation of images that produces region of interest URN and we use this. Marie-Claire uses this daily with her students who are working on manuscripts. They transcribe the manuscripts and embed in their transcription using the facts attribute of the TDI element, the URN of the region of interest associated with that word they transcribed, or part of word or whatever. What I would like to do is to make that interoperable with the IIIF spec, and to basically be able to leverage the tool sets that are around managing images for using IIIF. So what we did, I don't know if people are familiar with the Open Sea Dragon JavaScript libraries, which is a set of JavaScript libraries around doing this with IIIF. We built something similar for the site URN syntax that the Homer multitext uses, and that's what we use.
Could I ask a question on that? What's the objective of the interoperability there? I mean, what are you seeking? How are you seeking to interoperate or engage?
Mainly, I would like to be able to take advantage of the huge amount of tools that are being built for IIIF. So we had to build our own image management tool to manage our image data, and we didn't have enough time or enough expertise to do it, so we only got partially done. And there are plenty of tools out there for doing this that are IIIF compliant, and so So that's really the main reason I would like that, is because that's the standard that people are coalescing on and are building things for, and I don't want to have to build all of these things myself. The IIIF spec also goes a bit further than CITE did. CITE was about is technology independent, which makes it, that's one of the Neil and Chris's main, one of the things they really strongly adhere to, that they're not tied to any technology, right? So that their images, so that those URNs have meaning outside of a URL or HTTP URL in which they're served. And I think that has a ton of value for the CTS part of CITE, where we're talking about texts and things, but images are very, very technology dependent. And so it doesn't help you really to have a URN of an image that's a region of interest if you don't have a tool that knows how to serve that region of interest. And that's where I'm going with the need for interoperability. I think that the two standards are, in fact, very, very compatible, and it's very easy to convert a site URN that identifies a region of interest on an image to IIIF format. So I don't necessarily think we need to throw out one to use the other, but I definitely want to be able to use all those tools that people are building, those manuscript viewers and the image servers are managing images. I mean, Thomas has been, he knows that our image stuff that we build wasn't sufficient for his needs, and he's been using Omeka, and Omeka now has IIIF support, he says, and so it's really important to be able to not have to do everything yourself.
May I add something? I mean, the sad thing about this is what Perzet has built would have been completely sufficient for my needs if there wasn't the problem with copyright attached to it. I mean, Perzet is open and has a very open philosophy, but it's open full stop. So there are no sufficient needs in Perzet to actually protect some of the images that are not completely open to copyright. And some of the museum's collections, although theoretically all those images should be public domain, have a different opinion on the matter, and we as a department don't want to engage in legal conflicts about this. So we needed to find a way where we can partially password protect some of the images, and this goes well with Omeka as an easy, pretty much almost out of the box content management system that is then also again API-able and queryable via because it's a Dublin Core standard behind it, and we can serve the images to different transcriptions tools and so on, rights dependent, obviously. So that's a sad thing. There was all this development work in Perzet that would have been very, very useful if the world would have been a tiny bit better. So I would love to have used the Perzet tools instead.
Greg, we had those workshops with one of the last Tiglio workshop we had was around images and what the state of the current solutions are and what we really need in an image solution. And Pietro, I think I've sent around that link very recently. There's a link to a set of requirements, a requirements document that Pietro wrote up as a result of that. That's really comprehensive and describes exactly what we would like in an image solution.
George, go ahead.
May I ask a question just to pinpoint things? Imagine a tree bank repository where at the leaves of the trees you don't have the words, you have facsimilar fragments. So you see in the tree bank visualization, you see exactly what it is in a certain manuscript, or maybe in a collection of manuscripts. Now, I have three questions. Is this desirable to have? Second question, can it be done already with the existing infrastructure? And if not, third question, should we go out of our way to make these kinds of things possible? So to overcome copyright and lack of openness things, and overcome organizational hurdles and so on and so on. So what do you think?
I'll leave that to our editors.
But why do you think that this should or could be desirable?
But suppose you have a difficult reading somewhere, and you see that because of the syntax, then and the problem is really hard. Then you want to know all the relevant information on screen. So maybe the coding was wrong because of a certain marking in the manuscript has been interpreted as a letter, but it was not a letter. And at that point, it becomes relevant. You want to see that. You don't want to switch to a whole other system to see the facsimile. You want to see the facsimile next to you. You want to see it right there. So it's a more aggressive form, putting the data you need for your research. You get that under your eyes, under your fingertips. And if you do that on sufficient scale, I think it can speed up the research. It's easier, and then we can do more.
I think of other traditions we don't. Well, we have Jamie was listening before, so the Assyriologists have a much stronger practice of multiple layers of transcription, starting with the unnormalized interpretation of the signs to a normalized interpretation through translation. And in that context, I think it's obviously you really want to go. I think link to from the transcription, from your transcription of the sign to the sign itself. So then you start to get a sign data. That level of precision is something that's been done in the Homer multitext, where your transcription provides you with your textbook, your reference work of abbreviations. Because often the big issue is what are these? It's not like a standard letter, but contractions, abbreviations. So that's a place where I'm not sure about the tree bank. The tree bank probably operates on a normalized word, but in the transcription, that's where you really want to have it.
The transcriptions are the juggling machinery.
Yes.
What you really want to see are always the facsimiles.
You want everything linked together,
Yes.
so.
Yes.
But at the end, if you put an image of a word on a manuscript, then you already have taken kind of decision what kind of word it is and where it belongs in capital.
Because of the transcription.
Exactly.
Transcription is made before the manuscript occurs. And you can select from the outside. In these manuscripts, show me the leaves of the notes in these manuscripts.
That
The system can get them to
okay. Show me the real object.
yeah.
It's there.
reference of the real objects.
Yes, yes,
All
right.
kinds of configurations. So, yeah, we're still not thinking agile enough because facsimile is not just a photograph of a page, it's data, and you can take pieces out of it and recombine them. It's not so difficult, but we think it's difficult.
This is actually what Homer multiplex is doing, more or less. I mean, they connect transcriptions, pieces of manuscript images.
And do they exploit it?
Interface, you can see both of them. And see. No, I don't. Great. You cannot point on the image and see the transcription, can you? Homer multiplex.
So I don't think so. I think it's from a transcription to the image.
Yes.
They kludged Google Maps as their front end. So they put the images in there and they use the ability to define regions of interest as their infrastructure, and thus they can use pretty standardized coordinates and zoom in and zoom out. So it was a clever way of doing it. I think, and the problem with the Homer multitext is it's done everything right, but it kind of lives, it's kind of a demonstration of what's possible and what needs to be done, because it kind of lives in its own space. And it's not always easy to actually see the things that they've done, and when you try to see it, it's often broken.
What we really needed with the site, with the image stuff, was a management interface for people to manage their own images and upload their own images and manage their own data set. Site set forth rules for identifying and images and regions of interest in the image, but without the tool set to support it, you're kind of stuck unless you want to do it exactly the way according to their workflow. And we all have different workflows. So that's really where we got stuck, and we kind of went down a rabbit hole in developing our own tools there, and that's what I'd like to avoid again on the image front, because there's so much work on images.
Your idea of image annotating a manuscript or transcribing it makes me break out in hives, because we've been doing it. We do it over and over and over again for decades, and maybe with the IIIF we finally have a standard so that the tools come and go, but the overall system won't. So we don't have too much time. I'd like to have a chance for everybody, or as many people as possible, to come up with a suggestion of what we should do. Or a particular question of who should we engage in this conversation, in Germany or out of Germany. Are there particular people we haven't mentioned who we should bring in? It's Dirk.
I know a group in Groningen, the Netherlands. They're also working on Qumran, from a chemical perspective. So they're looking beyond the picture. They work together with the guys who do also manuscripts, OCR. So they're not unknown, really, and I think that's another dimension. So transcription, facsimile, and then physical, real physical objects. How does that all merged together?
Anybody else?
One much
We got
Royal Commission Institute version. So another PDL for the person is
So people should put this into the suggestions into the Google Doc.
Yes.
When you say monk project, which
that's this project of word spotting that allows you to index manuscripts. And essentially, I think that the word spotting can be an approach that can be used to get something really something usable out of articles. The only problem is that it's kind of it's really resource demanding. But
now Chiara has come up with, and Chiara and Katerina, who was here yesterday, have come up with people to invite for sort of ancient geography, which is an interesting use case because it demands a number of different things, including the exploitation of modern GIS, but not being limited to modern GIS because people did not have Google Earth 2,000 years ago, and they were unable to think in terms of maps because maps didn't exist. So we have classical Arabic and Persian. We have editing as a classical editing, more general editing. We have geography, and I'm thinking of tasks. What else?
In Daria, they have, I mentioned yesterday in the introduction that they have an annotation group, and one of the people who is involved in that annotation group is Thomas Kollatz from the Steinheim Institute. I think it's in Mannheim. I'm not exactly sure. But if we do want to get Daria involved, I think that would seem to be the place where it would fit most readily, because we're not talking about the Langzeitarchivierung that Ulrich was talking about yesterday. I think we're more interested in having objects of whatever type and then putting information on top of them. And the last time I talked to Thomas, what he was doing is they were doing Jewish tombstones, so in Hebrew, and doing, I'm not exactly sure what they were doing with that, but I assume that there's something with photography and perhaps squeezes and things like that. I'm not exactly sure. but he could be somebody that it could be interesting to get involved in the conversation. Maybe a better interface point with Daria than somebody from the higher infrastructure side. And I think Ulrich is from the slide that we saw yesterday that had the top infrastructure, the general tools. I think Ulrich is way up here in the top infrastructure. I think Thomas is more down towards the general tools, or even the Fachspezifische, or whatever that. Yeah. Anyway, somebody else can translate that who speaks English better than I do.
Some more information would be.
Okay, so they're doing transcriptions as well. I assume they're doing transcriptions and they're doing GIS stuff. So yeah, so that could be. But it's good to know. But we'll probably see him later this week in Göttingen, so I can talk to him and see what type of interest there is from that cluster in itself.
Anyone, in terms of editing, anyone speak to what people actually use to do the editing in the Dixit community? They've been training editors. They have lots of people working on this. They just hired or advertised for a postdoc to work in canonical citations feeds, and which was interesting to us. We had to talk to them. So it's not clear. Do they just use oxygen or?
Yeah, they use oxygen. That's what they use.
So they're really very traditional. They use oxygen and they write like a traditional apparatus criticus. Or I guess they would tag the text and they can generate the accurate out of that.
There are three methods to create an apparatus that goes with annotating text. So you decide according to what you really need. Traditional terms, positive apparatus or negative apparatus, you can code it easily, and then the apparatus is on the basis of tags. It's kind of tricky to decide what kind of apparatus you want to get from this. If you have one canonical source that annotated different readings from other sources, but if you have actually sources parallel to each other, but actually
I think that the like Dirk already mentioned this, which is the integration of linguistic annotation and editing, which I think is fundamental. And I always point out that if you look at the text of Aeschylus, it's got upper and lower, it has etas and omegas, it has upper and lower case, it has punctuation, it has accents. These are all annotations reconstructing the original text. They were not in what Aeschylus, whatever he wrote. They were not there. So if you're going to do that kind of crappy annotation that's implicit, you should really do scientific annotation that defines not only those features, but also why there's a comma here. and makes it explicit so that you can do more things with it. And if this is, I think, I was trying to set up my computer so I could show Alpheus, and which is still the Alpheus first book of the Odyssey is still like the best model for sort of a modern edition, where you have a tree bank, you have an aligned translation lined up, you have really clean morphology. You can see this form shows up 38 times in the Odyssey. You get a lot of the control that we like to have, and this is what I think we have a lot of linguistic annotation, languaging, and databases just for searching. When in fact, when attached to the text, it can transform the ability of people to work with that text. And so, because you really need a nice reading environment. And one of the nice things happening on the US side is the Digital Latin Library is very interested, like somebody is, in making the apparatus criticus more interesting and more comprehensible. And they're also looking at integrating that in the same space as the Alpheus tool. So really, you're looking at, they're going to make progress on the AppCrit, and we can generalize the aligned translations and the tree bank support that we've got. Then you're starting to see a new kind of environment.
Yes. It's almost possible. Things exist in isolation.
So when I was at Berkeley talking to Nick Overhuis, a Syriologist, I'm mispronouncing his last name, but he's or Niek, also Dutch. He was, I asked him, what do you want to talk about? And he said, tree banking and aligned translation, aligned text, thank you very much. He got that right away. And he wanted his alignments were between Akkadian school books and the Sumerian text they work on, or Akkadian Sumerian in glossaries. Just fundamental, sort of a fundamental data type that we have. People where I could see the energy sapping out of the room on both sides of the Atlantic. Last questions, last comments?
Are we going to plan this?
A room not full of smoke. We need to reflect on what the next step would be. I think that we should have there are a couple of mechanisms. One mechanism might well be an RFP an open RFP for, what do we need for high precision philology? What do we need for new kinds of cross-domain philology? I actually studied the ancient Near East, where you do work with Akkadian and Greek at the same time, or to improve our ability to go from Greek to Arabic to Latin, and things along those lines. And we could ask for support for that. I think we also should have some domain-specific meetings, whether it's get the classicists together or get the editors together. So the editors, medieval editors, I'd like to get the early modern German people together to talk about making, like the Nibelungenlied and so on, more, putting that in one of these reading environments. We have sort of geospatial thinking everybody cares about, sort of social networking also. Is it Arabic and Persian? I don't know. We need to decide what the categories are, because we can have 1,000 meetings and get what's the best way to break down this space. But I think maybe we should,
I think that is your decision to decide these spaces. Because, everybody has his expertise or their expertise, and of course, I would say, well, critical editions is the thing. Oh, and other people would say another thing. But you tell us, we built this for
I think, well, I'll finish by saying I see one way of thinking about it is in terms of workflow. I mean, you start with objects, writing-bearing objects, text-bearing objects, and then you're in object space. You have inscriptions, you have manuscripts, they have dates, they have histories, they have all sorts of stuff. They may be in 3D, they may be in 2D. One of the things that Shared Canvas thought about was the fact that you might have, you don't always have a single 2D representation of a flat page. And there's the concept, you've got a region of interest, and it might be on a vase that you see from different angles. I don't know how well they thought that out, but that's the kind of thing we need to think about. Then there's the issue of the narrow transcription, or the diplomatic transcription, and then you have normalization, and then you have tagging, and then you have integration of multiple versions. You have cascading layers of linguistic annotation, and then you have issues like audiences, people trying to understand all of this stuff. There's in there, I left out OCR, OCR and transcription. There's the issue of assessing scalable methods for assessing the reliability of classification tasks, i.e. you have citizen science or crowdsourcing, and we're performing classification tasks like tree banking a sentence, and these things can be assessed even if there's no single gold standard. There's a gold standard if you're transcribing a modern edition where you have modern print. So there is a right answer for what characters are on that page, but there are going to be multiple points of view on the tree banking of a complex text, or the transcription of a damaged document. But how do we nevertheless figure out how to assess who's reliable? 99% of the names in an ancient text may be clearly unambiguous, but prosopography deals with those places where you don't know which Antonius is being referred to. So that's a huge citizen science issue right there, and that's a thing where you can model people's performance. You have to be clever about not assuming you have simplistic gold standards. That's another thread. So, okay, well, I think I will come up with suggestions. People scribble in the Google Doc or send emails, but scribbling in the Google Doc is good because everybody can see it. And it doesn't get lost in email chaos. Bridget, do you have any thoughts at the end?
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this, though.
Okay, guys. Well, with that, I declare this meeting over 6 minutes early.